Hello all, Rick here with a video that no doubt will be completely undivisive and in no way cause arguments. The top 10 Federation Starfleet ships of all time. So, to preface this, I'm drawing only from canon vessels, however I will be using Apocrypha to attribute details to these ships. For example, books, schematics and games say that the Sovereign could reach warp 9.975, while canon says warp 8 because that is the highest speed we see verbalised on screen. Also, I'm going to essentially look at these ships when they launched and in the context of their sci-fi times. The Miranda class faded into a background ship by TNG, but at its launch it was more capable in comparison to other vessels of its time. So, let's get started. The Odyssey class. I put this at 10th position on this list for one reason only, and that is that most of what we know of it is from Apocrypha. Its appearance is limited to background info, and although it featured as the Enterprise F, that ship was decommissioned early because it had a total systems failure. Emerging around 2382, the Odyssey class was a massive undertaking in terms of resources and time to construct, and the pivot into the Romulan evacuation limited its production even more. Saying that, at the time of its launch, it was clearly the most advanced and capable ship of the fleet. So much so that any mission it was assigned was not utilising it to its fullest. Its sheer scale, at over 1 kilometre long, makes it a multi-role vessel purely for the facilities it can carry. Effectively the Galaxy class with extra. By the 25th century it was still in its prime, although other vessels were beginning to exceed its capabilities in specialist fields, a theme that we will see repeated in this list as it goes along. Sometimes Starfleet just looks at the best tech they have from every field and says, all of it, and creates a pinnacle of a starship, and the Odyssey was in this line of thinking. As mentioned, the only real criticism is that it may be considered a bit too excessive. The Walker class was one of Starfleet's first vessels that shaped things to come. The design featured some uncharacteristic uniqueness, but internally established a lot of next steps for the Federation to springboard off of. It experimented with horizontal transporter arrays, had the bridge on the underside of the saucer, and was capable of atmospheric flight. This hodgepodge of technology was a combination of winning ideas and an experiment in of itself, yet the product was greater than the sum of its parts. Created in 2195, it began with the winning designs from the Starfleet of yesteryear, and then added new developments at a Warp 7 engine. Over its life it served much the same role as the NX had, being at the forefront of deep space exploration, and a year later the Shepard class was built as a more streamlined but stripped back version. A lot of work went into developing warp profiles for the next step in Starfleet development. With duotronic upgrades in the 2240s, the Walker maintained its position in the fleet, although by this time it was regarded as outdated, which was ultimately the problem. I can't place it higher on this list, as it was clearly the most advanced in the fleet at its launch, performing better than expected, but in the following flurry of innovation it was quickly surpassed. You would probably expect me to put the Sovereign higher, but honestly, I think I can justify its position here. First off, however, at its time of launch, it was clearly the most advanced ship in the fleet in certain areas. It was certainly a step up when it came to armaments, but at this time the Akira, Norway, Sabre were contemporaries in that field, and arguably the Defiant might have even outclassed it. It could reach an incredibly high warp factor, and did so with minimal damage to subspace, but the Intrepid class matched this and could do it for longer. It did have diplomatic suites and a fantastic sensor system, not eschewing the other duties of Starfleet, but they took a back seat as it was built to weather rising threats. If you were to aggregate its scores, as it were, you'd probably find its total did indeed put it at the front of the fleet. It's just there were individual specialty classes that outdid it, and honestly, a lot of the innovation in the Sovereign was merely a few years ahead of what went into the Galaxy decade. The next burst in innovation was just around the corner, however, and the Sovereign would take a step back to become a background vessel. It hurts for me to put the Excelsior class here on the list, but looking objectively, I think this is where it needs to sit. At the time of its launch, it was supposed to be a revolutionary ship, and if the dream of transwarp came to fruition in full, it may well top this list. But that is a what-if scenario. In reality, while the Excelsior was a culmination of technology produced by Starfleet in the 2280s, it had already received an overhaul by 2290 and failed to deliver on its promise. Aside from that, however, it was generally the most advanced and fastest ship in the fleet, designed to replace the Constitution class and take on any role needed. Even by the time of the Dominion War, the Excelsior got one last hurrah as a frontline cruiser in engaging Jem'Hadar forces and served as the flagship for many admirals. The USS Lakota shows us what they were truly capable of, with that vessel receiving specialised systems upgrades to make it one of the most formidable ships in the fleet, so even by this time, the Excelsior could be revamped to continue. The only real reason this class of ship seems to have faded from use is simply that it became more practical to create a new line rather than continue to overhaul the original. Having said that, the layout and aptitude of the Excelsior was so exemplary that they went on to replicate it not once, but twice with the Obana and Excelsior II. When you get a design that is so well established that Starfleet simply says, "Another round?" I think you've made a winner. Nevertheless, those are separate classes, because yes, the Excelsior was eclipsed even if it did linger well beyond what people thought probable. The Sagan class, as well as a shout out to its better armed cousin, the Echelon. The Sagan class was built on the four-nacelled principle of the warp-coasting starship to reach deep space for exploratory or survey missions, and while built primarily for scientific mission profiles, the Sagan featured multiple adaptations that made it far more advanced than many contemporaries. It was the single vessel to feature extensively reverse-engineered Borg technology, from hardware to algorithms. This gave it incredible computing potential and unexpected variability with its scientific toolkit. While not the most powerfully armed ship in the fleet, its intelligent systems could most often create workarounds for any situation, and at the turn of the 25th century, it was undoubtedly the most advanced scientific vessel in the fleet. The only thing that keeps it from being higher on this list is that its major exploit was the ease at which the Borg could use their familiarity with its systems to their advantage. Borg tech is always a risk, not only because it might attempt to, assimilate you, but the payoff can be exceptional. Maybe the Sagan overdid it a bit, but now that the Borg are out of the picture for the near future, well, that's the last time they commandeer a Federation ship's oh, for God's sake. Now, personally, I'm not a fan of the Ambassador class. I find it kind of generic, but it cannot be said that the vessel was not a major step in the development of many technologies in Starfleet. It was one of the first to feature fully isolinear systems and phaser strips replacing the standard turret arrays, and set the groundwork for future design. The Ambassador class was developed around the 2320s, emerging in 25, and being in its heyday until the mid-40s. These vessels would go on to remain in service until 2370s too, although the class was eventually eclipsed by the Galaxy-class cruiser. The Ambassador was another one of those ships that was there to do a bit of everything, but honestly one of the first to be largely dedicated to diplomatic overtures since the Constitution. This means that alongside its multi-role explorer functions, it was designed to be seen, which made it a target. Nevertheless, it held up, equipped as it was with the best gear from every field that the 2320s had to offer, so it deserves this spot on my list. I'm going to put the Intrepid class here, because quite simply, Voyager proved that this class could outperform and exceed its expectations, accomplishing far more than it was initially thought to. The Intrepid class was originally designed to be the fastest ship with a sustainable high warp factor for deep space exploration. Its new warp system minimised warp damage, and its bioneural circuitry made it one of the smartest ships in the fleet, capable of a multitude of rapid calculations and optimizations. And remember, Voyager itself was operating with half its bioneural circuits because they retrofitted it with isolinear tech to keep some spare. Its sensor systems were unparalleled too, and it had an abundance of science labs. However, on top of this, it was far more robust, and its shielding system was smartly maintained. Whereas some classes relied on power, the Intrepid relied on efficiency and quickness. In combat, it held its own too. The only real lacking element it had was comfort. While hardly Spartan, like a Defiant, it was not made to operate for 5-year missions away from the Federation. Despite this, at its launch the Intrepid class opened up a whole new angle of exploration for the Federation and established new design and mission profiles moving on. The Sutherland class. Yeah, that came out of nowhere, right? This spot was a toss-up between the Reliant or Inquiry class. Inquiry on paper might have been one of the most advanced ships at launch, but it was a combat ship first and foremost, and only really held the spot of most advanced for about 3 years. The Reliant and Sutherland classes were created for the sole purpose of testing how a bunch of new innovations worked together, ushering in a new era of Starship design. While the Reliant and Sutherland share many similar abilities, the difference was in scale and role, with the Reliant built to replace the Miranda, and the Sutherland to act on a larger scale, replicating the Nebula class. I would slide the Andromeda class in here, or the Ross class instead, but the Andromeda is not canon at this point, and the Ross class, aside from some innovations, was on par with the Sovereign but constructed later. So the Sutherland effectively combined the most advanced sensors, intensive automation and smart systems, new hull composites, top-of-the-line weapon arrays, and many labs. Just as the Nebula class was a slightly more specialised Galaxy class, losing a little of that adaptability, the Sutherland was operating in that same surveyor sphere. However, the innovations across the board still made it the most advanced ship, as its new developments were then applied to later designs like the Alita and Pathfinder. Of course, the Constitution was going to make this list. First launched in 2245, this vessel was the forefront of new design innovations and the culmination of much development from the preceding decades. While the rest of the fleet consisted of ships that even originated in the 22nd century, the Connie took the latest advancements in warp engine refinement to create a long-range exploratory cruiser that could handle multiple assignments. Posting on these vessels quickly became sought after, with ships like the Enterprise trailblazing new contacts and encountering many new things. On top of this, recent additions to canon have made the Connie more of a modular ship than its initial outings in the original Star Trek, ensuring that the vessel continues to remain at the forefront of design for decades to come. It was frequently the testing ground for new innovations too, and expected to be able to operate on long-term missions without major overhaul for 5-year stretches. In the 2270s, the line was pulled for its most ambitious refit program yet, all in the hopes of prolonging its time in the stars. And while the Constitution Mark II, in my opinion, looks even better, it does mark the beginning of its end. This was the last attempt to keep it relevant as technology moved on, and while it did work, all it really did was keep it in line with models like the new Miranda and saw it outclassed by things like the Excelsior. Nevertheless, the Constitution class was created to be the poster of Starfleet and best typify that organisation: exploration, diplomacy, and defence. Regardless of design style preference, The Constitution was best in any of these roles, and held that crown through overhauls and updates for at least 3 decades. At this point, I'm going to give a couple of honourable mentions. The NX class, of course, it's excluded for not being a Federation vessel, but obviously stood out from the very little competition it had. The Inquiry class, despite its poor introduction, was undoubtedly a hyper-advanced craft, but much like my next runner-up, it was tailored for one thing. The Defiant class, again, is in this vein for me, and more temperamental to boot. The Lamar class is likely to be on this list, but as of writing this we don't know enough about its specs. And lastly, the Constitution Mark III. This one certainly was a good ship and punched above its weight, but ultimately, while it was the fastest and most agile for its size, it was deliberately scaled back in other areas. It could have been more powerful, but was not. The Galaxy class was ambitious and powerful. Originally, work began on this class back in 2343 already, but with such a long development period, multiple reworks and alterations were made. Initially, concerns were voiced too at how simply powerful the ship would be, and what need would Starfleet have for such an overbearing vessel. For this reason, attempts were made to make it seem even more diplomatic and peaceful than ever before, with crews including civilian infrastructure and extensive diplomatic and recreation suites. Internally too, the vessel was more comfortable than other ships with an abundance of space. The Galaxy class was excessive and a true marvel of Starfleet. It contained top-of-the-line systems at its launch and even pioneered new ones, such as redoable saucer separation. Numerous labs and systems meant that it could handle almost any topic, from single-handedly performing planetary surveys to warding off threats with its mere presence. It emerged at a time when Starfleet thought itself untouchable, and had events unfolded differently, it might still be around. Certainly, recent Trek has shown that it can still carry its ample weight, but the Borg happened. The Dominion War. Subspace damage was uncovered. Multiple factors ate away at the development of newer Galaxy classes, and the vessel eventually was considered too resource intensive to produce. Additionally, the dangers of the war gave Starfleet pause on the notion of including children on a starship. This is a case of the environment changing and leaving behind a ship, rather than technology outpacing it. Although in the wake of the USS Voyager's return, that too eventually happened. We saw a future that never came to pass, where the Galaxy class continued on and was even overhauled to keep it top of the line. And if events had not transpired as they did, it's a very feasible outcome for this class. So for these reasons, it tops my list. So, there we go. My rundown of the 10 best Federation starships. Sure, there are others that might perform better in one field or another, like the honourable mentions. But to me, the saying, "Jack of all trades, master of none," though oft times better than a master of one, applies more to what makes a better vessel. Some of these might not even have maintained their crown for long, but I picked them because they either best exemplified an era of innovation or ushered in new ones. What do you think? Agree? Disagree? Is there something I should have included, and why? Thanks for watching. I've been Rick, and I'll see you later for another video. I've got a couple more of these top 10s planned, but they take a little longer to put together, so until then, thanks again, and goodbye.